The next presentation is sponsored by the Worshipful Company of Wax Chandlers, to whom we're very grateful. And we have an interesting session, Comb to Candle, with Shirley Bond. Her husband Richard has done all the filming, and I'm sure you'll agree with me that it's a really high quality presentation. All right, so over now to Shirley.
Hello, I'm Shirley Bond. I'm here today to help you with your wax processing. I've been keeping bees since 2010 and I've never traded in any of my wax. Today's presentation is entitled From Comb to Candle, and what I'm going to do is show you how to process wax such as this that you've taken from the apiary, possibly through a solar melter, and make it into candles like these. We've got little novelty candles at the front, some Christmas candles there on the left, various different types of cast candle around the outside, and a large dipped candle in the centre here, together with two church type pillar candles. All of these you are capable of making from your wax. Before we start the actual processing, I need to remind you that beeswax is highly flammable and it's extremely messy. It gets everywhere, over all the work surfaces. You'll inevitably drip some on the floor, so cover all the work surfaces, cover the floor, and be very careful about your clothes, or wear old clothes that you don't mind about. I usually wear a lab coat with old clothes underneath. You cannot get wax out of clothing effectively. Beeswax also denatures if you heat it over about 80 degrees for any length of time. That means that it loses its wonderful aroma and colour. If you're going to make wax into candles, you want to be able to appreciate that lovely aroma and colour when you come to burn your candles. So why go to the trouble of processing your wax? Here I've got a block of wax. It's about 2 kilos in weight, and that's suitable for exchange at one of the big bee suppliers. And you probably get about £7 for that. Probably a bit more if you did a straight exchange for foundation. Here I've got 2 blocks of wax. These have been processed a little more. This is about 1 kilo. And finally, some wax blocks. About 30 grams or 1 ounce. You'll get about 33 of those from 1 kilo of wax. I sell those at £1.50 each, so that gives me £50. I'll let you decide what you want to do with your wax. I have here some of the fairly simple equipment that you will need to process your wax. For safety's sake, you need to use an electric hot plate of some sort because of the high flammability of wax. You'll need an old saucepan with a bowl to make your bain-marie. Wax needs to be heated over water, not heated directly on the hot plate. You can obtain specific bain-maries. These are double-sided. They have an inner and an outer. You add water here and they go directly onto the hot plate, so your wax is still in a water bath. Another useful piece of equipment is a jug with an open handle like this. That will sit in a saucepan of water when you're pouring candles, and you can take the handle without it getting too hot. Food grade containers like these, and you can just say ice cream containers or yogurt containers, are really useful for when you want to let your wax set. These have sloping sides, and so the wax is easier to remove than if it was a straight-sided item. The wax will need to be filtered in order to be clean sufficiently to make candles. So you'll need a filter medium. Something like this, which is a cheap supermarket own brand kitchen cloth, non-woven variety, and you don't want those that have holes in them. The other thing, if you're going to take it even further than that, if you want to be showing, you can use large coffee filters such as this, or even lab quality filters. If you're going to be doing that, you'll need to have some sort of oven to process it in. I have to emphasise it needs to be a specialist oven and an electric oven, and it needs to have some safety measures in place so that you don't end up having a house fire.
I use two main stages in processing wax. The first, wet process, detailed here, uses water to remove as much honey and other debris as possible. Starting with a pre-soak and moving on through the use of a solar or steam extractor if available. However, small quantities of wax can be processed using the methods I'm about to demonstrate.
In order to start the processing, wax comb like this needs to go into a bucket and be soaked for 24 hours. Once you've got all the wax in the bucket, you need to hold it down with something heavy and then add the water, otherwise the wax will float up to the top. That needs to be left a minimum of 24 hours to be able to soak out any honey and pollen. So here we've got some wax that's been through a solar melter, but it's still quite badly contaminated with honey and other bits and pieces. So we're going to place that in a bowl and process it some more. You can see there it's still got some honey in it. And we're going to add some hot water to it. At this stage you can add quite hot water because the wax takes a lot of heat to be able to melt it. So you want about a third as much water as you have wax. And then we're going to place that over the pan of hot water, and we'll need to keep stirring it while it melts, and obviously watch the temperature. I've got my temperature probe here so I can keep that in and keep an eye on the temperature. This will probably take about an hour to melt, so we'll come back to it once everything is melted and it's ready to set. So now all the wax has melted. Being careful to wash it all the time and to make sure the temperature doesn't get too hot. So now we're going to pour it into one of these containers so that it can set. I've got that warm because I want it now to set without any disturbance, so preferably overnight. So I'm going to set that down and leave it overnight to set. While that is left setting, a lot of the debris will fall to the bottom and into the water, and we'll be able to clean it out once all the wax has set. The bowl, while it's still warm, you can use some kitchen towel to just clean that out, and most of the mess is left. You can, by putting it over the bowl of water again, you can melt any wax with debris in it and clean that out. It makes clean-up much easier.
I am now going to demonstrate how to process the pre-soaked comb.
Wax that has been soaking for 24 hours. We've shaken off the combs to get rid of as much of the dirty water that has soaked out honey and pollen. And we've placed that in the bowl. You can see it takes up quite a large volume, so we'll have to gradually add wax as this wax melts. So we add some more hot water, And the water we use, if you're not in a soft water area, you need to get some soft water and use either soft water or some deionized water to do this. Wax reacts with hard water and the processing doesn't work very well. So once all of this has melted, we'll add a little more water. We'll put it into one of the sloping sided containers in the same way as we did the wax that had come from the solar melter, and that will be left again overnight for it to set. Here we've got the wax which we melted with water, stirred it well, and then we set it aside to set overnight. So I'm going to pour off the water. I'm doing it into another tub here so that you can see the colour of the water. This is something that's usually best done over the sink. We'll just pour that off. So as you can see, the water in here is really quite dark, and the block has very conveniently fallen down into my hands, and you can see the bottom of the block there with all that debris on it. So what we need to do now is remove that debris, and one of the best ways I've found of doing that is by using a standard hive tool. So all we need to do is just scrape this to remove most of the debris. There you can see I've got rid of most of it from this section, and you can see the wax now is looking quite clean. I'll finish that at a later time. Once it is complete, you need to let this block dry for at least a week before you melt it again and filter it. So here we have the pot of wax, which is now set, one that we melted over water yesterday. So I'm going to pour off the water from it so that I can scrape the bottom. Oops. This is best done over the sink, but that does allow you to see how dirty the water is. Good job I had some kitchen towel prepared ready. And there's the bottom of the wax. This one has come up beautifully, and there's very little debris on the bottom. But in order to scrape the debris, it's best done while the block is still wet. Just use a hive tool to scrape the worst of it off like that.
I'm now going to move on to the second stage of processing. At this point, the wax should have been allowed to dry thoroughly, and it is important to avoid any water getting into the wax. If you make a candle which has a small pocket of water in it, as the candle burns, the water will vaporise and things can get a little explosive.
So I'm now going to show you a simple way of filtering your wax. I've got a block here that has been melted with water. It's been scraped off at the bottom using a standard hive tool, and it's been left to dry for at least a week. You want to get rid of all the moisture. This is part of the drying process. I'm going to melt that again in a bowl over water. We're not adding any water to this at all. So this again will take half an hour or so, because we don't want to let the wax overheat again. So while the wax is melting in this bowl, I've prepared a second bowl with the filter medium in it. That is also over hot water, so that the filter medium itself will be hot when I'm ready to pour the wax into it. Because otherwise, if I try and pour it into a cold filter, the wax will just solidify in it before I have the opportunity to filter it. I've also got moulds here. I have weighed the wax before I started to make sure that I've got plenty of moulds here into which to pour the wax once it's been filtered. Most of the time when I'm filtering wax, I like to pour it into 1 ounce blocks because that's a convenient way of measuring it when I want to make candles. It's also convenient for selling. Wax is now completely melted. I'm just tipping it towards the camera there now so that you can see that although it looked quite clean in the block, there are actually quite a lot of bits in there. It is important that you do tip the bowl towards the side so that you're heating the side of the bowl as well. You don't want the wax solidifying on the side of the bowl. We've got the bowl tipped now to one side to warm it towards the lip so that it doesn't solidify as we're pouring it. This other bowl is warm so that we'll be able to filter it. The other important thing is to have a piece of kitchen towel or similar available because you want to wipe the bottom of the bowl so that you don't make drips come out into the wax. So we just pour it straight into the bowl, taking care to make sure it all goes into the filter and not down the sides. Put the bowl to one side and now carefully lift the filter and the wax drips through. Tip the filter to one side to get the rest of the wax through. That's about all we're going to get out of that one. So now again, make sure you've got your piece of kitchen towel in hand. Tip the bowl to one side again. Not forgetting the oven glove so that you don't burn your fingers. We're warming the bowl to the edge again and we're going to pour it into the 1 ounce blocks. As you get towards the bottom of the bowl, it's a good idea to take a careful look because you sometimes get a little bit of debris in the bottom of the bowl, but this one is actually looking really quite clean. Just the last few dribbles there that can be melted and added to another block later. And there's the nice clean bowl. We'll put that back over the water. This is the filter medium that we've just filtered the wax through. There you can see the amount of debris that has come out of that wax.
Oh.
So here, very quickly afterwards, we have the wax there. This will darken a little as the wax cools, but you can see that this is really quite clean wax. These are the moulds that we left to set after we'd filtered the wax. So I'm just going to tip the wax blocks out. They come out of these moulds really quite well. There we have it. We've got 8 blocks there and they really look quite reasonable. In order to be able to make a candle, you need some wick. And to be able to make a good beeswax candle, you need square braided wick. Square braided wick, as the candle burns, curls over at the top and trims itself, which produces a good flame, and that's what you want. You should be able to see here that these are 2 different diameter wicks. You need to match the diameter of the wick to the diameter of the candle that you're making. Some wick is sold as 1/2 inch or 1 inch wick, in which case that relates to the size of the diameter of the candle that you're making. So a 1/2 inch wick is good for a 1/2 inch candle. Others are sold with different sizings, but there will be some indication of the size of candle that they are suitable for. I like to wax my wick, and the way that I found easiest to do that is to just cut a length of it, wind it around my hand, and in this bowl I have melted wax. So I'm going to drop that into the bowl, and you'll be able to see from this camera that there are air bubbles rising up from that wick. This is the reason that I like my wick to be waxed, because I don't want those air bubbles coming out when I pour the candle. I wear the gloves because this is a messy business. This is my patented tool for taking too much of the wax off. So I lift out one end of the wax, put it between the two pieces of wood, close it up, and I can then remove the excess wax. This is actually easier as a two-person job, but I'm doing it on my own today. And then we have the excess wax removed and the waxed wick. I have here a selection of moulds. We've got two polycarbonate ones. Something like this conical one will require something to stabilise it when you're pouring the candle. A glass like this, maybe the inside of a toilet roll, something to hold it securely while you're pouring it. This is a glass mould. Again, you'll need something to support that while you're pouring the candle. We've got a silicone mould here. This one has a slit all the way down one side, so wicking is very easy on that. This silicone mould does not have a slit down the side. It does have a hole in the end, and it will need wicking, probably using a wicking needle, something that's quite long, but you need to be able to get the wick through the eye. So you pass that in, and you may even need a pair of long nose pliers in order to be able to pull the needle out of the other end. So those are some extra little bits of kit that you might need. If you're making a candle using a mould like this, when we come to filling the candle, you may need to do this several times because of the amount of shrinkage that you get on the candle. You can even make your own wooden mould. This has been made out of hardwood using a router, and you have to remember to leave a space for the wick at the top. And that makes a candle that looks like this. So that fits in there. And when you come to pour the candle, once again you can use elastic bands, or you can hold it together with a couple of woodworking clamps. Either works equally well. So if you want to get creative, you can make your own wooden mould. In order to make your candle, you need to wick the mould. In this instance, I'm using a silicone mould, and I've got some wick prepared. It's been previously waxed, and I'm going to wick the candle, the mould with this. So this particular mould has a slot all the way down one side. So I place the wick into the slot, and it's also, the slot continues across the bottom of the candle. We need to push the wick into the centre of the candle, and then to hold it closed we use elastic bands. These need to be tight enough to hold it nicely closed, but not too tight as to deform the candle. So you need to continue this, placing elastic bands about 1 inch, 2.5 centimetres apart, all the way down the mould. So I've now completed putting the elastic bands to hold the seam together, but you will see that I've got a slight gap along the bottom of the candle. It's important that we seal that, otherwise when we try and pour the candle, well, the wax will just come straight out. I've got some molten wax here, and I find it really useful to use a disposable plastic pipette and just drop a few drops of wax along that seam, making sure you cover around where the wick comes through, and that will effectively seal the candle. So having sealed the bottom of the candle mould, we now need to just check where the seam is all the way down on the inside to make sure it matches up exactly. So we look right the way down and make sure that matches up exactly. Then I find it really useful to use something like the centre of a kitchen roll to just help stand it up when you're going to be pouring and while it's setting. So a couple of elastic bands just to hold it in place, and that will make sure that it stays upright once you're pouring. The other thing that we need to do is secure the wick centrally in the mould. And to do that, I've just got a couple of cocktail sticks held together with an elastic band. That slides over the wick and rests on the top of the mould. You need to pull that taut without pulling it out from the bottom of the mould, and that is ready to pour. So I have a jug of wax here. You need to be careful not to get any water drips in, so I'm just drying the bottom of the jug, and we need to pour in one go. So there we go, straight into the candle mould and all the way up to the top in one smooth pour. There we go. Now, this is quite an intricate mould, so just tapping the mould gently releases any air bubbles that are around the side of the bowl, the mould, so that the full shape of the mould is complete when you come to empty it. We are going to have to refill this mould. Wax shrinks quite considerably as it sets, and if we don't refill it, we chance having a void left around the wick, which isn't good. As I said, the wax shrinks as it sets, so we need to fill the candle with some more wax. In order to do that, I'm just going to melt a little of the wax at the top. This is just using a skewer, and I've got a cook's torch just to heat that. This will melt the surface around where I want to fill with wax and allow me to fill that. And this is another time where I use the pipette to fill it. I want to top it right the way up so that when we're finished, the candle will have a nice flat bottom. So in true Blue Peter style, here's one I prepared earlier. This one has been set for a couple of hours. I'm removing the elastic bands. It's the same style of candle as I've just poured. You can see the slit opens up very readily, and you can lift the candle out. And there we have a queen bee on honeycomb. That's what. Now we're ready to finish the candle. We've obviously got some wick still left at the bottom of the candle. I use a pair of curved nail scissors so that I can get in nice and tightly to the bottom, snip that off, but the bottom is still not flat. So what we need to do here, I've got a pan, this is a non-stick frying pan that I've got heating on here. I've just got a little bobble of wax there to check whether or not the temperature's good. And that's melting reasonably readily, but it's obviously not too hot. So I'm going to put the candle into the frying pan. You need to be careful not to burn yourself when you're doing this, so keep your hands as high above the pan as you can. Just soften the wax on the bottom of the candle, holding the candle vertically, allowing that wax on the bottom to melt. And then at the side here, I've got a tile covered in baking parchment, so I can take the candle directly out of the pan and down onto the baking parchment and hold it so that it'll set, and that way the candle will be able to stand up straight when we're finished. The other thing that we need to do, the final thing we need to do, let's move that out of the way, is we need to trim the wick. We don't want the wick more than about 1 centimetre long. So again, using the little nail scissors, just trim the wick off, and there is your finished candle. You may need to just trim the bottom a little bit. While this wax is warm, it'll just break off if it's gone over the edge. And there is the finished candle.
Here is a taste of what you could enjoy if you take a little trouble with processing your wax.
I do hope you've enjoyed today's presentation and that it will inspire you to use some of your wax to make beautiful candles. But remember, to really enjoy them, you will need to burn them. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Shirley, for a wonderful presentation. And if the BBC are watching, I think they might have a new recruit as a cameraman. It was really such a well documented and filmed presentation, really good. And we have some really interesting questions. So first of all, what about the type of water that you use in the wet process? Should it be rainwater, tap water, or distilled water?
It depends what area of the country you live in and whether or not you're in a hard water area. Hard water doesn't mix well with candle wax. It tends to discolour it. If you're in a soft water area, it's fine to use tap water. Otherwise, deionized water or filtered rainwater is fine.
Thank you. Yes, I do recommend a filtering of the rainwater because I used it once straight out of the water butt and I didn't filter it. Yeah.
No, not a good idea.
Not a good idea. No. How strong do the plastic containers need to be, or will they melt?
If you can put boiling water into the plastic containers, they will be fine. So that's a good test. So put the container in the sink and pour some boiling water from the kettle in it. And if the container's fine with that, you're okay to use it for the wax.
That's a really good tip. Thank you for that. Why do you need to let a block dry for a week before remelting?
It will have some residual, very fine water in it. So if you leave it for a week, preferably on some kitchen towel or something to encourage the water to dry out from it, then you definitely won't have any water when you remelt it in the dry process.
Thank you. That's a really important point. Yes. Yeah. It was intriguing about using the pipette to put the drops of wax in. I always make a terrible mess when trying to do that. So I thought the pipette was a really good idea. But what happens if the wax actually solidifies in the pipette? Does it come out?
If you have some molten wax, and you put it back in the molten wax and allow the wax in the pipette to melt in there. It may take a few minutes. Otherwise, the pipettes I use are disposable anyway, and they only last for a relatively short time. But what I try to do is ensure that I empty the pipette before I finish using it. And that way there's no solidified wax in the pipette.
You're obviously a really good methodical worker. Right. What temperature should the wax be for actually pouring the candle?
Preferably between 70 and 75 degrees. If it's hotter than that, you can tend to overcook it and lose a lot of the aroma and colour. As I said in the presentation, I don't like to let the temperature go above 80 for any length of time because of that. But for melting and pouring candles, I only usually let the temperature go somewhere between 70 and 75 degrees.
And that's a good tip, because it's got to be hot enough, hasn't it, to actually fill into the mould all the little, if you're using those silicone moulds, they have to get into all the little bits and pieces, yes. And another question about silicone moulds is, I know at the National Honey Show, I've seen these perfect candles, and you cannot see the seam in the silicone moulds. And yet sometimes the ones I bought, you can actually see the seam in the candle.
I did mention in the presentation that when you put the elastic bands around the mould, you need to look down into the mould and check that the seam is properly aligned all the way down inside the mould. By doing that, you can usually avoid seeing any seam marks on it.
Thank you. The one-ounce moulds that you were using, what are they actually made out of, the ones that you used?
The ones that I used in the presentation are made out of silicone. I have others that are made out of a harder plastic. But the advantage of the silicone ones is that you can just twist the mould and they come out very easily. Sometimes you need to cool the wax for longer in order to get it out of some of the harder plastic moulds.
Thank you. The filter medium that you used looked like a J cloth. If it wasn't, what would you recommend?
I recommend using supermarket own brand kitchen cloths. The J cloths have small holes in deliberately because apparently that helps to mop up water, whereas most of the supermarket own brands don't have those holes in. I've got a sample here. I don't know whether you'll be able to see this, but I'll try holding it up. There you go. So there's no holes in that. It's just a non-woven fabric.
Oh, right. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Right, there's a question here about how do you store your candles? Because sometimes they have that wax has that funny sort of bloom on, doesn't it? After you've had it for a while.
Yes. What I like to do is to, particularly for intricate candles, I like to wrap them in a little bit of kitchen towel and store them in airtight boxes. They do sometimes still develop that bloom on them. What you can do to remove the bloom is either to use a hairdryer and waft it over the candle for a short time, and that will remove the bloom. Or if you get a very soft paintbrush, you can brush the candle with that, and that will also remove the bloom.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a good tip. And one along the same lines really is, will polishing with a cloth make the outside of the candle shine? And what type of cloth should you use?
Yes, it will, but you can't really do that with some of the intricately molded candles. The standard recommendation is to use silk to do it, and preferably old, well-washed silk. But I found that nylon tights stockings works very well too.
Oh, right. Yes, thank you. I have tried that in the past, not terribly successfully, but I must try again. Yeah, thank you. As well as soaking the comb for 24 hours, is it good to rewash it a few times and break the comb down as finely as possible, or is this a waste of time?
You can wash it several times. Leaving it to soak for 24 hours encourages most of the honey to go into solution, but then a final rinse before you actually melt it will remove more. I find that just allowing it to melt in the bowl rather than bothering to break it down anymore is usually quite adequate.
Yes, yeah, okay, thank you. Is there any kind of conversion factor to compare wicks of different sizing methods? Oh, right. But I think perhaps maybe you talked about wicks in the presentation, and you said it was very simple, didn't you? You use the size of wicks as the diameter of the candle, but then it gets a little bit confusing when you have. I know I have one of the Eiffel Tower, and of course the top is very much thinner than the base. I mean, what size of wick would you recommend for that?
What you can do if you have candles like that is to use a double wick from about halfway down the candle. So you need to kind of twist two wicks together for the bottom half of the candle and just leave the single wick going up in the top half of the candle. But it is very difficult when you've got shapes which are much narrower at the top than they are at the bottom.
And with the type of wick you should use for beeswax, presumably, is it always what they call the square wick?
Yes, the square braided wick is the one to use.
Yes, and that's not interchangeable, is it, with the paraffin wax ones, the rounded ones?
No, the reason for using the square braided wick is that it self-trims as it burns. It curls over within the flame as it's burning, and that will self-trim the wick. If you don't get it to curl over while it's burning, it doesn't burn as well.
All right, thank you. One more question about the wick. Is there a right way up for the wick?
Apparently, yes. I've not found it to have very much effect, but aficionados say yes, there is. And what you need to do is make essentially a double-ended candle and try burning it from one end and then from the other, or make two identical candles, one with the wick one way up and one with the wick the other way up, and it will burn better in one direction than the other. As I say, I've not found it to make that much difference.
Right. Do you bother with brood comb wax extraction?
I do extract brood comb. It doesn't tend to be such a good colour, and I keep it totally separate from the other wax. But I found that that's fine for use in polishes, or if I'm making coloured candles, that's what I would use if I was making coloured candles. So it's going to have dye in anyway, so I would just use the wax from the brood comb for that.
Oh, thank you. When in the whole process would you actually add the dye?
when I'm melting it to actually make the candle. As I'm melting the wax, I add the dye at that point. And you can buy specialist dyes. It looks a little bit like very thin chocolate bars, but it comes broken up in plastic bags normally.
Do you have any tips for exhibiting candles at the various beekeeping shows?
Use your very best wax.
Yes.
And you'll need to make a lot more candles than you're ever going to exhibit. If I'm exhibiting 2 candles, I'll probably make at least half a dozen from the same mold. Or if I'm dipping candles for exhibition, then I'll probably make a dozen candles, maybe even more, just to get 2 or 3. It depends which competition you're entering. Some demand 2 candles, some demand 3. But I always find that I need to make far more candles than are actually required to show.
To get the perfect pair or the perfect 3.
Yes.
Yeah. One question that's just come in, it says, can the dyes sold online for soy candles be used?
I don't know. I just don't know. I always buy dyes that are specifically for beeswax candles. So I don't know the answer to that.
Yes,
all I can suggest is that if you've got some, you perhaps try it with just a small amount of wax and a small candle. That's what I do. If I want to try something new, I use a small amount of wax, make a small candle, and try it that way.
Because the other thing too is, I think in the BBKA insurance, if you're actually selling your candles, you are a bit restricted as what the insurance covers with regards to dyes and things, I think.
Yes, I think that's right. If you dye the candles, I don't think you're covered under the insurance.
No. Oh, right. Do you make scented candles? If so, when would you add the perfume?
I don't make scented candles. I have a lot of people ask me to make scented candles, but I don't like to add anything to the candles, really. As I say, I do make some coloured candles, but not very often. And I don't like adding scent to candles.
Well, after all, the beeswax does have a unique scent anyway, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
I think it's always such a beautiful colour when you've got that, really clean, beautiful wax. Right. There's another question here. Do you run any workshops for wax processing?
I have previously run workshops at the Spring Convention for wax processing. I've run workshops in Harrogate for wax processing, and I may be running some later this year, depending on what's available, somewhere around the Darlington area. But I do have a lot of people asking for workshops.
Yes, yeah. Well, that is the key thing in the whole process, isn't it? Is actually cleaning and processing the wax.
Yes.
The pouring of the candle is the easy bit, yeah. The relatively easy bit. Right. I don't think we have any more questions now. So thank you very much, Shirley, for answering all those. That was a really good session. So I think you and Richard are going to be even more famous now with your wonderful, wonderful videos of processing candles. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.